Graduated from National University, and most of you probably know this, but went to work for the United States, or your Ohio Department of Transportation, the District 3 headquarters for a short period of time. Then, of course, in 2000, ran for county commissioner, and was very fortunate 4 years later to be reelected, and finished up my second term as commissioner in 2008. Interesting enough, a path that I never thought I would be taking. In 2008, the majors of our local Salvation Army approached me at a United Way event and told me they wanted me to come work for them. And I just laughed at the time, but it wasn't a day or two later I was in their office, and now, of course, I'm serving as a business administrator for the Salvation Army. It's a wonderful place to be, I must confess, and they're certainly making an impact not just here in this community, but all across the country and world. One thing, though, has stood out to me about being at the Salvation Army. I can assure you that's an outstanding place for Matt Miller to be right now, because it's great training for how to become a better servant. There's a big difference between being a county commissioner, sitting in a governor's office, and approving funding for a government program that's designed to help those in need. There's a big difference between doing that as a commissioner and now standing in the lobby and looking eye to eye with the man and woman and children that actually have the need, hoping that you have the means to help them. The reason why I even take these few minutes here to share my background is because what I would like to point out, I think if you read between the lines, you can see that each of the positions that I have held, they've been training. I've been in training to learn how to serve people. And if there's one thing that we need right now in Washington more than anything else, are a few men and women and leaders who understand that their role as a representative in the United States Congress is to serve you and me and the United States of America. We've got a lot of bosses in Washington. Men and women that have been very successful, are well educated, they're used to calling the shots, they're used to telling people back home when they were making their fortune, this is what needs done, you're the one that's going to do it, and this is when it's got to be finished. That's not what the United States Congress is all about. When we see our leaders meeting at the White House behind closed doors to decide the policies that are going to govern and dictate our lives, that doesn't sound like public service to me. It sounds like someone who thinks they're awfully more informed than you and I are, and that they have a right to tell us how it's going to be. My background would suggest to you that I do know a little bit about service. I'm hoping to get the opportunity to serve you in the United States government, in the U.S. Congress. That leads right into why I'm running. Consider for just a moment, this past year you watched your United States President remove the CEO of a corporation and turn ownership of the company over to the employees' union. You saw him reach out and bring 6 terrorists, enemies of the United States, lift them out of their camp offshore and bring them to the United States. You saw Americans assume ownership of AIG, and you saw a government that for the first time in my lifetime is referring to people in our administration as czars. Czars. It is absolutely obscene to me that we have come to the point in America where it's acceptable to even use that term to describe one of our public servants. This is a nation that has spent its entire existence confronting czars and doing away with them. And yet here we sit in America, 1 year after electing a new majority and a new president, and in the United States White House, we have working alongside the president czars who have more control over our daily activities and our daily lives than we could have ever imagined, and we didn't have a single vote and say in electing them to those positions. The reason why I'm running is because I believe the United States is in need of men and women who understand what was intended by the founders when they put together the Constitution. That this federal government was to have a limited role in our lives, and that if it were to overstep its bounds, it would ultimately cause the demise of our people and of our economy. And I think when you take a look at what's unfolding in Washington today, you'll see that that's exactly where things are headed. As I move forward, and I take a look at what's unfolding here in the United States of America, I think that the focus and the reason why I am running is because I'm all about securing our nation's future. That's what it's all about, because quite honestly, we're teetering right now. And I hate to use this term, but the reality is we have started down a decline towards socialism, and I hate to use that word in front of you tonight. Let's face it, those actions I described, how are they any different than what you've been seeing happening for years in socialist countries? Yet I'm convinced there's still a majority of Americans who are paying attention and who are willing to speak up and make a change. They started to make their change in Massachusetts, and we'll hope it continues all across the country. But there are three areas that I think we need to focus on as we move forward and secure our country's future. Number one, economic security. It's absolutely unbelievable the amounts of money that are being spent by our United States, our federal government. Tonight, the national debt is, I believe, close to $12.5 trillion. Hard to even get your mind around that figure. And maybe what's more significant is, in 2009 alone, the U.S. government's budget, 1 year annual budget, ran $1.4 trillion in the red. Now you may think, well, we always talk trillions when we talk the federal government, so that's not a big deal. In 2008, the federal government's budget was $450 billion in deficit. 1 year later, we spent $1.4 trillion, more than what we had. That's 1 year's time. And I know you guys all watch Fox News and you read up, so you would know this. But do you realize that one deficit for 2009 was more than our country has accumulated ever since President George Washington was in office? And we did it in 1 year. Would common sense not tell us that's not healthy when we're working towards a prosperous future? You and I know that by borrowing, you can live beyond your means for a certain amount of time, right? By using your credit card. But eventually, it catches up with you. Why should we not think our nation isn't bound by that same principle? And if you're still not concerned about the government spending, consider for just a moment that China, one of the largest holders of American debt at $800 billion, has recently decided they're going to slow up the rate at which they purchase our treasury bonds. Why? Because they're starting to get concerned that we may not be able to honor these obligations. Now, if China, who most likely isn't always getting up in the morning thinking about what can I do to help America, is thinking to themselves, I don't know if these guys can pull it off. Don't you think you and I as American citizens, maybe we should stand up and think, this isn't a good thing to be spending so much money on a stimulus package that has created how many jobs here in Ashland County and across the state and across the nation? Doesn't appear as though it's working as quick as what we thought it would, and yet it cost us $1 trillion. Economic security is one of the most critical issues that we need to address in these coming years, because the fact of the matter is, no nation has been able to survive a debt load like we're bearing today.